Okay, and we're live. Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. My name is Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. I host and produce this show in partnership with fellow writer Joe Moldover. We have a great episode for you. I'm so pleased that you joined us today. So, here on Authors Love Bookstores, we bring to you a conversation between an author and her favorite independent bookstore to shine a light on storytelling and creativity, essential parts of our culture and our collective human experience. We talk about the books written by our guest author, and we'll also discuss what makes the indie bookstore we're featuring so special. We hope you'll be inspired to read our guest writing if you haven't done so already, buy books from the bookstore we're featuring, and maybe even someday visit the bookstore in person. Special thanks to Rachel Levy-Lesser, who is helping out behind the scenes to produce today's episode. So today I am so thrilled to welcome one of my favorite writers, best-selling author Curtis Sittenfeld, to the show, as well as bookseller and poet Jan Weissmiller to the show. Welcome to both of you. We're so happy that you're here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Curtis and Jan before we begin, but I have a confession. So I want to know how many people out there are like me and that you have a Curtis Sittenfeld section of your home library. Many of us, right?
I do.
Maybe, like me, you've also had conversations with your friends about which of Curtis's books is your favorite. I just had that conversation. You can debate which one's your favorite. I'm sure there are many of you out there, and I'm happy that you're here. And of course, I agree with you that Curtis is a talented and wonderful writer, and we're just so grateful she made time for our show today. She is the best-selling author of 6 novels, Prep, The Man of My Dreams, American Wife, SISTERLAND, I Don't Have Enough Arms, Eligible, and RODHAM, of course, as well as the short story collection, You Think It, I'll Say It, which was picked for Reese Witherspoon's book club. Curtis's books have been selected by the New York Times, Time, Entertainment Weekly, and People for their 10 Best Books of the Year lists. They've been optioned for television and film. They've been translated into dozens of languages. Her short stories have appeared in The New Yorker, The Washington Post, Esquire, and many other publications, as well as in the Best American Short Stories anthology, of which she was the guest editor in 2020. Her nonfiction has also appeared in the New York Times, Time, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, Slate, and on This American Life. She's a graduate of Stanford and the Iowa Writers Workshop. Jan is an award-winning poet and owner of Prairie Lights Books in Iowa City, Iowa. Her poetry collection, In Divided Light, was published in 1999, and she is an editor of the poetry collection, A Poetry Criticism Reader, which came out in 2006. Prairie Lights Books opened in 1978. In 2008, Jan and her fellow poet Jane Mead bought the store from the original owner, James Harris. Okay, welcome, Curtis and Jan.
Thank you. By the way, do you know one that Jan also went to the Iowa Writers Workshop and that I also worked at Prairie Lights?
So yes, I know that you worked at Prairie Lights.
not to like preempt things, but
no, that's okay. That was my first question. Which was, I understand, Curtis, that you worked at Prairie Lights. So tell us, I think you might be the first guest we've had on the show who worked at the bookstore, excluding the bookstore owners who are also authors. But you're the first one who worked at the bookstore we're featuring. Tell us about working there, when you worked there.
So I finished at the Iowa Writers Workshop in 2001, and I worked there. I stayed in Iowa City for a third year and worked there from 2001 to 2002. I was not a full-time employee. I was a part-time employee, but I mean, it was definitely, I think that, Jan, I'm sure you can speak to this. I think like so many people have sort of fantasies of working in a bookstore. And I think those fantasies are partly accurate and partly not. Like, I think, I mean, it was like lovely to be surrounded by books and, you know, to have these like smart, interesting co-workers. And I think I have a feeling I might be best remembered for being like slow at the cash register. Like, but like, you know, or like some of it, I definitely remember like sitting in the basement looking at like making sure the ISBN number on the book and the sticker, which had the price tag, matched up correctly. But then also at the same time, I don't know, again, Jan, if this is still true, if you worked there, you could like take a book and borrow it and be very gentle with it and read it and then return it like it was almost like a library. Is that still true, or has that been phased out?
That's sort of been, we get lots of galleys, so there's lots of free books all the time, and we can ask the publishers for almost anything and they'll send it before it's published. So that sort of has taken
place. But in terms of the books you're actually selling, maybe not anyway. But so I definitely remember, like it was I worked there during the time that the corrections came out. Also, I can see, actually, Jan, I can see in the background those like green plastic readings chairs. I don't know if those are literally the same chairs, but they from 20 years ago. But those are what the chairs looked like. When like I do remember with one of my coworkers like moving the shelves back after events, and one of them being like, "Curtis, you sigh very dramatically as you move furniture." So, those are some of my memories. But Prairie Lights is a great bookstore. It's definitely one of the very best.
Did you? Well, oh, go ahead, Jane.
That we're in a great place to have a great bookstore. I mean, we are we have great readings because of the connection to the Writers' Workshop.
Yeah, that's how I feel like when you live in Iowa City, you're so lucky because like the literary world comes to you. You can have sort of so many of the advantages of not living in a like big crowded place, but then you still get, you could go, how many nights a week do you have events?
We had before the pandemic like 5.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
Yeah.
Wow. And you kept that up during the pandemic. You did Zoom readings or online. Yes, you did that as well.
Probably 3 to 4 Zoom readings a week, like lots of Zoom readings.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Publishers Weekly describes Prairie Lights as the hub of Iowa's vibrant literary scene. And Jan, you've been at the store since 1979. Were you the first full-time employee? I read that.
I was.
You were. And how was it that you came to buy the bookstore?
Jim really wanted to sell it, and he wanted me to buy it. And I tried to avoid that for 3 years. And then he discovered that Jane and I were friends, and he worked on her. And then I thought, well, if I have a partner and we have equal ownership, then it would be possible. And it's been very different, actually. I mean, Curtis may know that we have lots of the same employees that we had when she was here.
Terry's still there.
Terry's still there.
My supervisor, Terry. I always have to say hello to Terry. I know. It's amazing. Like the retention level is very impressive.
What is it about this store that people stay so long? Because you don't always hear that. What makes it so? What's the secret sauce that keeps your staff there?
Well, I think we have often when we're open. We're still not open full hours. We're not open nights yet until we have readings, but when we're open full hours, we have about 30 on the staff, and it's about 12 that have been here for 20 or 25 years, and it's a great place to be. I love being here. I mean, you have great conversations every day. You have great books to read.
Yeah, excellent. Speaking of a great book to read. This is the hardcover. It's now out in paperback. And actually, we're giving away a copy. So if you'd like to enter the drawing to win a copy of RODHAM, ask a question or post a comment below the broadcast, and we'll choose someone before the show is over. Curtis, I cried 3 times reading this book. 3 times. And I may have been sobbing like ugly cries at the end. Like, sobbing. I found the book like heartbreaking and also hopeful. Like, I at the end, I thought I was filled with possibility. I don't know if other people have said that, but
yeah, definitely. And people have said like sort of all of the above in terms of like someone suggested to me that the book should be sold with like a bottle of wine and like a box of Kleenex, because I think a lot of people do have a lot of emotions as they go through it. It's funny. I think that and I can certainly understand this. I think that some people feel like, well, I'm curious about reading the book, but I'm nervous that it'll make me have sort of uncomfortable emotions or like unpleasant flashbacks to 2016, which, you know, I watched that Hillary Hulu documentary, and as it approached the part where we get to the 2016 election, I felt like, you know, sort of was churning inside. So I totally understand that, but I do think that more readers come away feeling like reading the book has been sort of cathartic, or as you said, hopeful. Like I wouldn't say I wrote it with the intent of being cathartic, but I'm happy that people have that experience as readers.
What made you want to write this story? Like, what inspired you to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. So one, I do think it's, you know, what was for me like the terrible experience of the 2016 election, the actual, you know, election night, the aftermath of the election, the Trump years. Like I do think that I felt like I knew that I couldn't change like realistically or literally change the outcome of the 2016 election, but I actually could do it in my parallel universe inside my brain, and then I could like give that to other people. So certainly, like I think if Hillary Clinton had become president, I don't think I would have written this book. But that said, in early 2016, an editor at Esquire magazine had asked me if I'd like to write a short story from her perspective as she was accepting the Democratic nomination for president. And doing that made me have the experience of, you know, there have been so many essays written for my entire adult life about, I mean, literally, like I was a senior in high school when Bill Clinton was elected, on what do the American people think of Hillary Clinton? And writing from her perspective flipped it around. So the question was, what does Hillary think of the American people? And I just felt like, even though she's so visible and has been so scrutinized, that question has not been asked very widely. You know, like it's all about us looking at, you know, her pantsuits and like the tenor of her voice and, you know, like sort of, you know, what she does or doesn't say or does or doesn't do with her emails. And but like what does she think of the rest of us? So that it just felt like this really rich subject matter. And then I think the final piece of what pushed this into being, like, instead of like, you know, there's things that pass through your head that are thoughts, and then there's things that pass through your head that become a book. And I think that I had this realization that school children who knew that she was running for president in 2016, in many cases, literally did not know that Bill Clinton existed. And that really made me think, well, what if adult voters also had not seen Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton as, you know, interconnected and even a kind of package deal?
That's fascinating. I found that after I finished the book, I went down a rabbit hole of like Googling the 1992 60 Minutes interview and watching it.
Yeah.
You know, all these things I had lived, but had sort of put away in the back of my brain. So it was fascinating to see it here in your book. Jen, what was it like for you to read this book? Living in Iowa, you get so many politicians coming through with the primaries. So I imagine, and I know you had them at the store. I've seen Obama's been to the store.
Wasn't Jen? Weren't you on the front page of the New York Times when Obama came to?
Yeah.
Prairie Lights?
Because when he was in Prairie Lights, someone took a picture of he and I laughing about whether he should buy a Mitt Romney book, and that got on the front page of the New York Times. I was saying, well, you know, freedom of expression, we've got to represent everything. But anyway, well, I had, Curtis, did you read a book written by a historian at Duke, William Chase, called Bill and Hillary?
No, you know, it's so funny because I read, there's like a Carl Bernstein biography that I read, and then there is a sort of joint biography of them I read. But the funny thing about the Clintons is there is so much, and I did not read that book, and actually no one's ever mentioned it to me before. Yeah, so tell me about it.
That guy, well, it's actually I assumed you had read it because it's very good, actually. And he came to the store because he was friends with Linda Kerber that taught in the history department here, and read from it. And I'm trying to remember when that was now, but it was way before she ran. But I think his premise is kind of that they were one in love, and I think, and your description of the whole beginning, of how they meet and what their relationship is like was sort of a great fictional description of what I took away from that book. But also that they're sort of bond with each other, that they would both go on to accomplish a lot. I mean, they sort of did feel from the time they were in Yale on that together they would accomplish these things. And, as she tried in the very first term of his presidency, to be in charge of healthcare, and that didn't work, and that whole baking cookies thing happened. And so I guess I had followed them, ever since he was first elected, because it took almost no time for her to get all this crap from, the thing in Arkansas with the Rose Law Firm, that started immediately. And
I think even before he was elected, like in, 91, 92, like almost like she was, sort of controversial, which might just mean she was criticized even before he was elected.
Yeah. She was very controversial after the interview that she did on 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
People were really split over whether that was a good or a bad thing. I mean, I remember Jory Graham was teaching here then, and she was going around saying, this is how it would be in Europe, that a politician can have his own sex life, and that shouldn't affect anything. And in some ways, America is crazy about that, but it's a very different time.
Yeah.
like it's kind of ironic that we're talking about this in the light of Cuomo today.
Yeah.
I know. And that one of the things about the book that I found exceptional was the way we look at the double standard for female politicians and leaders and academics, the way that the pink tax, the way that women have to sacrifice so much time to look good on camera. I thought of that recently. There was a photo of Ted Cruz walking on the Capitol to go vote, and he was wearing gym shorts. He had come from a basketball game. It's like all sweaty, and he entered the U.S. Capitol, and you could never see a female senator doing that. They would never do that. They're always impeccably made up, and they'll always look so good, and the time that goes into that. And I found that examination of the double standard in the book, like, oh, I was so mad. And I wondered, Curtis, was that a deliberate goal of yours to address that, or was it inevitable when you talk about Hillary Clinton that these issues about sexism and this hypocrisy come out?
I think both. I mean, I do think that sexism is so embedded in how we look at female candidates and how we talk about them, and like what words we use and what subjects we discuss. And even, there was an article recently about like Kamala Harris's laugh, and I was like I believe it was in the LA Times, and I just thought, are you kidding me? It just there's this whole, or like the conversation about like, is Elizabeth Warren electable or something, like we just have these conversations that would be unacceptable or like non-starters, or like it wouldn't occur to someone to ask the same question about a very incompetent man, some of the men that I personally might consider unelectable. So I think that, like if I were trying to talk about, if I were writing a novel about, a female politician, which I was, I do think that stuff was like unavoidable, but it's not like I wanted to avoid it. I mean, I think in some ways, this book is, I think it's like very clearly and sort of unapologetically written in response to the 2016 election, but it couldn't be, like I didn't want it to be a retelling where I just pretended I had access to Hillary's thoughts, which I don't. I mean, it definitely is fiction, but I didn't want it to be like, this is what really happened, and I'm imagining what wasn't said. I wanted to like make it its own story and its own and I think that was one of the sort of like challenges, but satisfying challenges for me, was how much is it directly, like how far can I go directly kind of picking at things or borrowing things from the election without making it into like an essay or a screed, or if it is a screed, how do I make it feel like a fictional screed instead of an essayistic screed?
We have an audience question. Sharon wants to, Sylvia, I'm sorry, wants to know if Hillary ever received a copy of the book, and if you ever heard if she ever read it.
So I think the answer is no and no. I considered sending her a copy, and I've never met her. I've heard her speak in like, you know, very large settings where thousands of other people also heard her speak. And so it was, you know, by the time a copy of the book existed, like even an advance copy that I could have sent her, it was during the pandemic. And so I would have had to send it to her house, which, and I think that address, I mean, because she's so insanely famous, I think that address is available. But I was just like, it seems, I mean, some people have been like, wait, you were comfortable writing the book, but then you weren't comfortable like taking that step of sending it to her house. And I was like, yeah, actually, like I didn't, on the one hand, I felt like if she's interested in reading it, I don't want her to have to pay for it. But on the other hand, like it's written, she knows about it. If she wants to read it, I'm sure she can find a way to get her hands on it. I have never heard from her. And I feel like she's so famous that I would think over the last, you know, whether it's like 50 or 30 years or whatever, that she's developed methods for tuning out attention that isn't like productive or helpful. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't see my own novel this way, but I certainly would think, you know, it's not written with her as the intended audience. And yeah, so the short answer is I've heard of, you know, people who know her reading it and have gotten even some positive feedback from those people, although even that is self-selecting, where if someone read it and hated it, they probably wouldn't seek me out. I mean, you know, perhaps the internet is what it is.
I feel like that's what Twitter's for.
Yeah, I know. Actually, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like there are some people who've sought me out on Twitter to sort of tell me the book shouldn't exist, but in most cases, I don't think the people have read it.
That sounds like Twitter.
Yeah.
So Jan, you were saying earlier that the store, you have multiple nights of events in the pre-pandemic life. We have a little bit of an echo, so I apologize. Can you tell us about an event that you've done in your years at Prairie Lights that was especially memorable, one of your favorites?
There have been so many, and there are so many writers that, you know, that I love. I love Deborah Eisenberg's short stories, so having her here was really wonderful. And we've had some great readings with Curtis. But
you know what? I actually have especially fond memories of. So my advisor in the workshop was Ethan Kanan, and of course I can't remember what year this was. I feel like it was like 2014 or 15 or 13. But I, for one of his books, I came and what's the one about the mathematician? Oh my God, I'm so, so mushy. It's like yes.
It was like 2014. I have the computer here so I can look it up.
Yeah. So anyway, he had been my advisor. You know, he still teaches at the workshop. He's like one of the smartest people I've ever met, and I got to interview him about his book, and like many of his students and of course many of his friends were in the audience. So that to me was like very special. I feel like I almost became verklempt at the end, like, you know, sort of, like I really learned so much about writing from him, and to be able to sort of express that publicly. Wait, what's the book?
The Doubter's Almanac.
Yeah.
About this guy that wins the most famous math prize, and it's a pretty intense book.
Yeah.
And did you read Claire Lombardo's book? The most fun we ever had, the Claire Lombardo.
Yeah.
She was Ethan's student too.
Yeah,
and
yeah. I just did an event
Yeah.
with her. Yeah. I feel like I can kind of see the Ethan influence. Actually, Claire is great. It's funny when I was in the workshop, I feel like some of the students, I think the year behind me, would call themselves like the Canaanites, like this sort of Canaan. But yeah, there's sometimes I was the editor for the Best American Short Stories 2020, and I chose a story. Actually, I want to like get I'm gonna reach up so I get the title right. But I chose this like not knowing who the author was, and it turned out I think that he was like a student. I'm sorry to say I don't know how to pronounce his name. William She, I think Pei is like what looks like the middle name of the first part of the surname, and then Shih, and it's this story called Enlightenment. And I was like, oh, I love this story, and it covers many decades, and it's so like rich in feelings. And like, lo and behold, he had been another advisee of Ethan. So that's always like fun to kind of find each other.
Yeah. Ethan did an event here, and when Claire read, he interviewed her too. He moderated that, and so that was great.
Anything about the store that you took into consideration or that you adapted during the pandemic, Jan, that you think you'll continue to do going forward? Like, will you continue to do some events online? Any other business practices that you changed?
Oh, I'm sure we'll continue to do events the publishers are going to want us to continue to do events online because it's easier probably than sending people here. But we hope to have in-person readings. We hope to do both. Okay. And free delivery. We started free delivery in Iowa City, Coralville, and people had wanted that forever. And I always thought, oh, it'd be so expensive and time-consuming, and it turns out it's not.
So can a person order like one book and get it delivered?
Yep.
Wow.
Because I have this. Well, the young man that's doing it now, he just has Google Maps, and he plans his route every day based on where the books are, and he does it really efficiently, and the customers love it.
I think that might be like the height of luxury to have a book just delivered to your doorstep.
The next step is like have the author come to your doorstep and read the book to you. That would be fantastic.
Well, maybe we can start that too.
A little inefficient, but fantastic.
Well, we have
right price.
We've also been lucky enough to have some pretty well-known writers living here, and we have taken books to their houses during the pandemic and had them sign them and ship them all over the place. And so we'll probably continue doing that too.
Oh, fantastic. Curtis, one of the things I wondered about when reading this book, and this is sort of a mechanical question, I guess, is when you write a book about a famous person like this, like you've done here, what kind of precautions do you need to take legally? Was there anything you needed to do to make sure you or your publisher didn't get sued by anyone, like Donald Trump or something?
Well, so weirdly, I did not go to law school. I mean, there are, of course, almost a disproportionate number of writers who did, but I'm not one of them. But the book is vetted by a lawyer who works for my publisher, and this happened in both the UK and the US. And so it's not like weirdly. I don't think I could explain it to you the way that a lawyer can, but you're holding that book in your hands and it has been vetted. So yeah.
So if someone else wants to write a book about a famous person, it's doable. You just need to
do it for Random House and have the lawyer. I mean, so there's sort of a separate question. Obviously there is a legal question, but then there's also like something that I am really fascinated by is the for lack of a better term, like the moral question, which is, actually a lot of people write a lot of books about famous people, but the interesting thing is how we sort of approach them differently. Like if the person is dead, or if the real name is not used, but the person is recognizable, or like if the person is dead, how long have they been dead, or like if it's told from the point of view, like, you know, if I wrote, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, let's say I wrote a novel about like Nancy Reagan. I'm not going to, but and then, you know, people might have one set of feelings about whether that's intrusive or not. But then what if I wrote a novel about Nancy Reagan, but her name's not Nancy Reagan? And then what if I wrote a novel about Nancy Reagan, but it's from the point of view of like her hairstylist and her name is changed? And like sort of like, where does our comfort lie? Which of course is very subjective and different for each person. But I do think, and also, I mean, even like, how does tone influence the reader's comfort level? And so if something is overtly satirical, interestingly, people are often more comfortable with that than with a more sincere or emotionally nuanced depiction.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's interesting.
I think it's, I know, because again, it's one of those things where like when you start breaking it down, it's kind of like, because if somebody says to me, I don't think you should write a book like this. Like, I think it's, you know, just, it's like a bad idea. I think that I understand where the person's coming from. Like, I wouldn't say like, oh, you're so foolish, or like, oh, here's how I can totally justify all my choices. Like, I think actually a lot of like the fiction I'm interested in writing is almost like me sorting out my own confusion about a topic, including about like the very premise of the book.
There's a lot to chew on there. It is. I mean,
it's a light conversation for a Wednesday afternoon.
No, but I mean, these are topics that or questions like I definitely had reading this book about, you know, what is it like to be this real person who has someone writing a story about them. And all of that, the things that go along with it, you know. And so I think it's really important to spend some time reflecting upon that for any writer or any reader.
I mean, it's also interesting with Hillary specifically, you know, like a person could say, like, oh, writing this book is so intrusive or so disrespectful or something. And it's almost like I could make the argument for you about why that's true. But my counter argument would be like, you know, if here's this person, like I've actually, in some cases, people who've helped me in publishing, I've wanted to send them kind of Hillary related presents to say thank you. So I'll look on Etsy, and on Etsy, it's like, you know, like a t-shirt that's like Hillary, or like everything is like, you know, it's like there's plastic nutcrackers that are like her in pantsuits, or, you know, there's like so much out there. Like if you typed Hillary jokes in as a search, I mean, just like steel yourself for what you're going to find. But I feel like to sincerely try to imagine what the world looks like from another person's point of view. And again, this is fictional. It's like an alternate historical timeline. It's not reality, but it's sort of taking the essence of who, you know, who my interpretation of Hillary was in the early 70s, and then kind of like going on this, you know, wild path with it. But I like to sincerely think of how the world looks from someone else's perspective, I think is not, I think that's an act of like compassion or respect. And I would never write about someone, a real person, that is, with the primary intent of satirizing them. Like, that's just not interesting to me. And I'll leave that to others.
You did in this book capture her inner voice, her inner life, and her voice so well. I mean, I had friends who have read it comment to me that's one of the things they loved about this book. They felt like it was uncanny the way that you captured the essence of Hillary. And it's clear that you did a lot of research in preparing. Was there one book or television show or documentary that was more helpful than others? Or was it your own sort of immersion in the world of Hillary on Etsy and other places?
I mean, the Etsy was like after the fact, like it was like after the book was published, and my like, you know, whatever, like wanting to send like a Hillary teapot to someone, or, which, as if I'm not mistaken, Hillary teapots don't exist, but they should. Like lovely, complimentary. So so I had a sort of breakthrough when I listened to a podcast called With Her that was actually a 2016 campaign tool created. It was, I think, created actually by the Clinton Foundation. But, there's a man named Max Linsky who's like, does podcasts as his job. He's the host. There's no pretense that the podcast is not pro-Hillary. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, in the first few minutes of listening to this host talk to Hillary and ask questions, it was truly like a revelation for me. I listened to it as research. I didn't listen to it at the time when it came out, but like she sounded basically more relaxed than I had ever heard her in any other interview. And it made me think about why. And I thought, almost every journalist who interviews her, I think, sees it as their professional duty to approach her with skepticism. I think in many cases that skepticism, kind of like borders on disrespect, but like they don't want to seem like they're going easy on her or whatever. And then I think she is kind of, if someone like I've been interviewed a lot, and sometimes people are kind of like if they're sort of skeptical towards me, I mean, thank God I'm not running for office, but I would not say it brings out my warmest, most open side. Or it's mostly like if you feel like someone's trying to kind of lay a trap for you, then the way you talk to them is just like mostly trying not to enter the trap, and there's not that much energy for anything else. So hearing that I felt like it came the closest to hearing her, the way she would sound, talking in a social setting or talking to friends or something like that. And which I'm sure she's actually more relaxed, but she's supposed to be a very warm person, to have this very sincere laugh, like a very loyal friend, in addition to being tough and smart and hardworking.
Excellent.
So what did you say that was again? Can we all listen to it?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it's a little haunting too to listen to it but it's called it's a podcast called With Her. So if you type, I mean, Hillary now hosts her own podcast. I think it's called You and Me Both. Yeah, I mean, there's podcasts abound.
Everybody has a podcast now.
Yes, I know. I'm like the last person who doesn't, but probably in the next week or two, I will. Dan and I are starting a podcast together. But yeah, it's a little bit. I mean, I will say it's haunting to listen to that. And there, even at one point, there's like an episode where they play the audio of her 1969 speech at her own Wellesley graduation. So you hear her like 18-year-old voice, where she sounds like her future self and she sounds like her young self, and it's just like, it's a lot for one's heart. But there's also, like, I read a lot of articles from, like, say, 2015 and 2016, and they so often had this tone of like, well, we have a lot of issues with Hillary. Obviously, she's going to win, and it's better than if Trump does. But like, there's things about her that like annoy us all, and blah blah blah. And it's like those just kind of like, it's like turning a knife in your heart or whatever. Like, it's just like, oh my God! Like if only that presumptuousness had been correct.
So I'm going to think of something a little happier for a moment. Jan, tell us about, if I were to walk into Prairie Lights, what book would you recommend? If I were to walk in and say, recommend to me an Iowa writer or someone I could only discover having come to Prairie Lights. Who comes to mind? What books would you recommend? Because our audience always wants to hear what the bookseller and the author on our show, what you're reading, other than, of course, RODHAM.
We didn't talk about American Life. If you like RODHAM, you should read American Life too. And they're very different. Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you.
And they were very different things. I mean, writing about Laura Bush was, as an empathetic character, was a very interesting thing to do, and it was very successful, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's funny because those books obviously have sort of, I don't know, like a sibling relationship or something, but they're similar and they're different. You're right.
They're very different, actually.
They're
Yeah.
very different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to your question. It's hard to separate Iowa Writers Workshop Iowans from regular Iowans, and there aren't that many books by just regular Iowans that you might not know about, I think, if you did, unless you came into Prairie Lights. So I would just be talking about books that I like of recent Writers Workshop graduates. Maybe I really like Brandon Taylor's short stories. Did you read those, Curtis?
I own the short stories. I loved his novel. Oh my God.
Real Life.
I was going to say Real People. No, not
Real Life.
Real Life. Which was
it's like normal people in real life.
the Sally Rooney, Brandon Taylor matchup.
Yeah.
I haven't read the stories yet, although I read the one, which of course I'm also forgetting the title. There's one set in Iowa City but I don't know if it was in The Cut, like, the New York Magazine website. And it's like this guy in Iowa City who works in, I think it's like the grocery store on the Ped Mall. Like, basically there's a celebrity who comes to town and they have this interaction, which is very like tinged with all sorts of feelings. Did you read this yet? I don't know if it was in the collection or not, but it's really,
no,
that
one's not
in Iowa City. It is not.
It's not. No, I read a story that's set in Iowa City where a famous writer comes, and the narrator, who's probably Brandon, ends up not going out with him.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then there's another story that's actually set in Prairie Lights, because we do art shows in our cafe, and Brandon had been asking me about who curates those, and they're always curated. My husband teaches in the painting department, so they're always curated by some student of his that's graduated and has no next step. Oh. And Brandon got really into that idea, and so the narrator of that story is the curator of the art shows, and he goes out into the country and discovers some, untrained painter, and that's kind of a wonderful story. I can't remember, that was published online somewhere too. It's also not in the book.
Oh, it's not in the collection.
No, the collection's very good though.
Oh, the collection's called Filthy Animals, by the way.
Filthy Animals, yeah.
Yeah, that's I think he's an amazing writer, and very prolific.
Very prolific.
Very prolific. I know who. Oh, I did an event recently with. This is someone who went through, I think, the nonfiction Iowa program, but Tori Peters wrote a book called Detransition.
Mm.
And
I
haven't
read that. Did you like it?
I loved it. It's not like Iowa flavored. Like, it has one of the characters has some Midwestern background, but it's fantastic. It's another book. Oh no, this is also. Now it almost feels disloyal to say books by non-Iowans. I was thinking today for some reason about Charles D'Ambrosio, who is someone else who's sort of workshop affiliated and just writes these. I feel like he sort of.
He's on the faculty now.
Oh, is he now on the faculty?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure of that. He's also sort of. I think of him being from the Pacific Northwest, but. He's an amazing, just like beautiful writer and like such richness of feeling, which I think is the primary thing that I respond to in fiction.
Yeah.
Curtis, you have a new short story that's out in the Atlantic, The Richest Babysitter in the World. We're going to put the link below for those who haven't yet read it. And I really enjoyed that. And that was another attempt at understanding a famous person. It's not a very good description, but
that's a good description. Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I haven't really talked about that story. I don't have my talking points down, but I think that's a fair description. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, there's yeah. I'll tell you some books I read. I wrote that. Let me get a little closer to the camera. I wrote that story, and then I wanted to do a little like sort of retroactive research or make sure. And so these are two books that I read that are
Oh.
I don't know. Have you read? Jan, do you sell these or have you read these?
We sell them, and yeah.
Have you read? I mean, sorry, I'll let you finish. You have or haven't read them?
I haven't read them. I read a lot about him online, but
Have you read the book? Have either of you read the book Fulfillment by Alec McGillis?
No.
Oh my God, I'm obsessed with this book. It's okay. So I'm probably like 30 pages from the end. It came out this year. It came out this spring. It's I think the way to say it would be like it's really wide ranging. It's nonfiction. It's like so carefully reported, and it's about things like kind of like about the daily lives of people who work in Amazon fulfillment centers, or even just like people who live near the places that have the huge servers that like the entire internet is on. And I feel like it's a mind-blowing book. Like I think this is a compliment. The reason it's taking me a really long time to read is that I realized it like really disturbs my sleep to read it before bed. And like it makes me feel like I need to, I don't know. It's jaw-dropping, and it's also very like it's a very smart, very measured book that's like devastating because of how smart and measured it is. But Jan, I think that I don't know if it would tell you anything you don't know, but I think.
Well, I have read, now that you mention it, I know I've read reviews of it, and I've read a lot of reporting on how those people are treated, and it's horrifying.
Yeah.
Are you reading this book for research for a new project, Curtis? I'm just sliding that in. Like
no. Well, it's funny. I don't know what book I'm writing, and like don't tell my editor. I was writing a book, and I got sort of, I don't know, like I kind of slid off the tracks. Which sometimes when I do that, I try to like slide myself back on by writing a short story, because it feels sort of like novels just feel so gigantic and messy, even though even though I've written them before. Sometimes I think like, how does anyone write a novel? And so I'll write a short story, and then but I don't know, it's confusing. By the way, wait, I see another book. As long as I'm putting my face close to this, have either of you guys read this? I'll hide my notes.
I did read that.
I loved it. It. Did you like it, Jan?
I did, very much.
God, it's such a crazy, gripping book. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I could talk to the two of you forever.
But apparently I could talk forever too.
But I think eventually we'll get kicked off the internet. So I just want to point out to our audience that we've put a lot of links below the broadcast to buying all of Curtis's books from Prairie Lights, and other things that Jan and Curtis have mentioned. Christina Powers is the winner of our giveaway for the copy of RODHAM. Christina, congratulations. Please email us at amightyblaze@gmail.com with your address, and we'll get that. We'll get that to you. And if you're interested, like I don't live in Iowa, but I am fascinated now to hear about all of these events that Jan and her team put together. And so if you're like me, you can just hop over to prairielights.com and you can subscribe to their newsletter so you can find out about all of these things that are coming up. So just because distance may keep you from Iowa doesn't mean that your dollars cannot be spent there and your time cannot be focused on the store. And of course, we encourage you to buy all of Curtis's books right now, and eligible as well. Yes, that's the one I don't have holding up. Thank you so much for being with us. It's such a pleasure. I had so many people, Curtis, reach out to me when they heard that you were going to be on the show. You have so many fans.
Oh,
who love your books.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you, Jan, too. This was delightful.
It was great to meet you.
To our audience, if you liked today's show, and we hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook to hear more about our other events. or hop over to our website, amightyblaze.com, to subscribe to our newsletter. It goes out every Monday and gives you a rundown of all the interviews that we do. And of course, we'll be back here next week for another episode of Authors Love Bookstores. Until then, be well and keep reading. Thank you. And